Welcome to my session, A Humanity-First Approach for Technology Production and Consumption. It is an honor to be a guest speaker for 3WE, a Web3 Summit. My name is Stacey Ann Berry. I am a public policy professional based in Canada who is building a government relations and professional development firm centered on principles of equity, community development, and sustainability. One aspect of technology production and consumption that we do not talk about enough is its impact on the environment, such as carbon emissions, water pollution, energy consumption, and e-waste. We also need to become more aware of human rights violations within the tech supply chain so that we can ensure ethical and fair practices are implemented both locally and internationally. As we embark on exploring and developing the metaverse, we need to assess its environmental impacts as it pertains to data mining and cloud computing, as well as NFTs, which is being used to purchase digital items. We should look at how the metaverse will increase electricity use, but we should also consider the positive impacts of the metaverse, which I'll discuss during my presentation. I will now share my screen. My presentation will provide an ethical and sustainable framework for mitigating environmental harms, as well as human rights violations caused by technology production. I will also include recommendations for how we as consumers can become a part of the solution. So just a disclaimer, the information shared in my presentation is based on my research, personal opinions, academic and professional experience. Information has been cited from various advocacy groups, think tanks, and online articles. All images used are royalty-free from canva.com and or PowerPoint stock images. So for the agenda, I will start with talking about technology production and its environmental impacts, human rights and ethical concerns, as well as environmental impacts of the metaverse, both pros and cons, barriers for creating change, and then I'll then present an ethical and sustainable framework, and I'll conclude with some reflections. When we think about the popular tech products that we all love to use, from our laptops, smartwatches, or smartphones, and various forms of headsets, these gadgets are developed using raw materials from the earth. But we might be wondering, what exactly are the raw materials that are in our tech gadgets? And there are many, and these are just some of them. It's not all of them, but some of the most common ones are copper, lithium, cobalt, manganese, and tungsten. When we think about copper, it's used for wiring electronics, conducts electricity and heat. Where are the countries that they come from, right? Most of it comes from Chile. It's the largest supplier, but it's also found in Utah and Arizona. And then lithium can be found in Australia. Most of it's in Australia, about 46%. It's found in Argentina and China as well. And when we think of cobalt, most of it, 60% approximately, comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo in the continent of Africa. It's also found in China, Canada, Russia, Australia, and the Philippines. And it's used for rechargeable batteries and circuits and makes microchips more reliable. And just going back to lithium, we know that lithium is what's going to be used for these electric vehicles. It's what's used to make batteries, and then manganese is used for rechargeable batteries, circuits in TVs and electric vehicles, and even steel production, and other like household appliances use these natural minerals. And when we think of manganese, it's found mostly in South Africa, but it's also in China, India, Ukraine, Brazil, and Gabon. And Tuscan, this is the weight that's used in our phone's vibrators. So this information is taken from the Natural History Museum. It was published in one of their articles, and I will include a list of reference at the end of my presentation. So when we think about these minerals, there is a price we're paying for convenience, right? And this hasn't just started now. This has been going on for a very long time in various industries, such as textile industries. There's a lot of natural minerals used in things. And we should be concerned about the environmental impacts of mining for technology, because there are toxic substance from the lead and mercury that is ending up in our water and our soil. This is now causing freshwater depletion, greenhouse gases, and erosion of land and habitat. Of course, carbon emissions and e-waste from the tech products that are ending up in the landfills, right? So the impact on our environment is not good. And we need the natural habitat to cultivate food. So those are some of the challenges. There's a quote by the 32nd President of the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt, who once said, "A nation that destroys its soil destroys itself. Forests are the lungs of our land, purifying the air and giving fresh strength to our people." So that's something that we all should reflect on. So when we think about the human rights concerns, and this is not unique to the tech supply chain, the textile industry, many other types of industries, the food production industry has very similar, if not almost the exact concerns. There are so many human rights groups, from Human Rights Watch to Amnesty International, that has been raising alarm bells about child labor, forced labor, and all forms of exploitation when it comes to the exploitation around the extracting of this cobalt. A lot of these miners are working in dangerous working conditions with faulty equipment that collapse and there's fires. It's very labor intensive because they have to dig under roads, homes, and railways. And then the wages are extremely low. No one in the West could survive off of these wages. Miners are earning between $2 and $3 a day when selling their hull at local miner markets, and often in very forced and abusive conditions. Not everyone has the right to not work or to choose not to work. And so this is something that we should all be very concerned about. When we think about the ethical concerns, you'll see in this picture, one person passing money to another person under the table, right? We all hear the stories, we read the headlines and the articles when it comes on the news of, dirty politics and things happening that are very unethical. When it comes to balancing profits versus the best interest of humanity, profits usually win. And it's very common in our society, and this has started for a long time, where labor is being outsourced, to produce goods for the West. Profits for multinational corporations often come at the expense of the well-being of people living in countries with weak labor laws. When we think about the fact that the mines and refineries in these undeveloped countries can be very lucrative because the labor cost is so low, and this was taken from the Future Strategic Natural Resources article. But again, there's human rights organizations that for many, many years have been raising concerns about these unethical practices. So when we think about the metaverse's negative impacts on the environment, the two main concerns are energy consumption and carbon emissions. When we think about energy consumption, over the next 10 years, data centers will consume 3 times as much energy as currently being used, as per an article in The Independent. Carbon emissions from NFTs and the hardware for the VR technology, right, and the state-of-the-art type of VR that's required will apparently pump as much as 2,000 pounds of carbon emissions each year. And this is found in a study, Greening the Beast 2020. And how concerned should we be? Well, data centers are responsible for about 2% of global greenhouse gases emissions, which is equivalent to the entire aviation industry. And people talk a lot about we need to fly less planes, but then here we are going into another direction that's equivalent to the pollution that the aviation industry is causing. If 90% of gamers were to move to the cloud, it will increase gaming's overall carbon emissions by over 112%. And it's not just gaming that's moving to a cloud. There's a lot of corporations moving their data to the cloud. So that is something we should be concerned about. Global Bitcoin mining consumes more electricity annually than the entire country of Argentina, as per an article in the BBC that came out in 2021. So when we think about the positive impacts of the metaverse, some of it has to do with potentially decreasing pollution because of the rise of virtual infrastructure to create virtual fashion, which has put in less burden on the current fashion industry to a certain extent. There's a lot of major brands that are now investing into virtual fashion, which is interesting. When we think about innovation and advancement in sustainable technology using simulations where medical students and pilots are being trained, and that's pretty interesting. And then better research for climatic trends, the metaverse can be used to assist with that. And then saving emissions on travel to a certain extent, because now there's an opportunity for us to do virtual events and conference, and then, even work remotely through this type of technology. So I now want to talk about the 7 barriers for creating change, right? And we want to be the change that we want to see in our world. We want to create this change, but there's a lot of challenges. And it's, again, not unique to the tech industry. But we know that our world is driven by greed, especially corporate greed, political corruption, weak regulations, and labor laws. It makes it very hard to create a very ethical and sustainable world where everyone wins and benefits. There's also either no accountability or lack of accountability when there are human rights violations or a violation to the environmental protections and laws that are there. And this causes a cycle to keep continuously happening. And then we think about the role we play as consumers. For those of us who are just, buying goods and buying more things than we need and feeling the need to constantly keep up with, the saying, the Joneses, that consumerism is kind of feeding with this mass production of things that are ending up in landfills. You buy something from a major online store, you return it, it ends up in landfills, and it just continues, right? There's also a lack of public awareness around this issue of harms caused by technology, around the human rights violations in the tech supply chain. So we do have a part that we all can play by just at least educating ourselves on the issue and understanding, what's happening in this area. So I now want to present an ethical and sustainable framework that can hopefully help to address some of these issues. It won't erase it, but it could at least minimize it. So when we think about our role as consumers, we can be more conscious by taking the time to do the research about products and looking at other alternatives. There are, tech companies that are trying to be more sustainable, more ethical. The brands may not be as popular, but they're out there. So take the time to do that research. Think of ways to extend the life of your electronics. You don't need to get the latest gadget just because it's available. If your phone and your laptop still working or has some minor issue that needs to be fixed, find opportunities to reuse and repair your gadgets to extend the life, to again eliminate things ending up in the landfill. Another way to eliminate things ending up in the landfill is through proper recycling of tech products and doing some research on how to do that effectively, taking your tech products to places that will ensure it won't end up in the landfills, even donating your products. There's a lot of social programs that could do with a secondhand lightly used computer or a smartphone. And then think about how you can minimize your carbon footprint. Monitor and track how much time you're spending online, using technology. There's apps that can help you with that. Practice doing a digital detox. I've done it. It's very refreshing. And even limiting your screen time, right? These are some things we could do to kind of, minimize the amount of energy that's being used through some of this technology. And lastly, speaking up. Right? Our voice has power. Use your voice, and there's so many ways you could do it: through writing to elected officials, calling their offices, voicing concerns you have about human rights violations, and organizations getting a slap on the wrist, making suggestions. We have issues of what some consumers feel is price gouging or products being intentionally defective. So we constantly keep buying the latest and the newest thing, and ensuring that we as a society demand greater accountability and even better protections of consumers' rights. So I do want to wrap up with some reflections. And this quote is an unknown author, but it says, "Look after the land and it will look after you. Destroy the land and it will destroy you." And we see the rise of fires and floods happening right now, right, in different parts of the United States and different parts of the world and other countries. And a lot of this does have to do with human activity and the constant extraction of the natural resources in the land. And of course, there's other factors, but these are some of the things that we need to be mindful of. Paul Hawkins, an environmentalist, entrepreneur, author, and activist, he once said, "The first rule of sustainability is to align with natural forces, or at least not try to defy them," right? And we often find ourselves going against nature, going against the wave of things, and almost fighting with it, right? And nature is responding. And so this is something that we can reflect on. A former First Lady, Claudia Alta Johnson of the United States, once said, "The environment is where we all meet. It's where we all have mutual interests. It's the one thing all of us share, right? So for me, this means we got to do our best to protect it because we need the environment more than the environment needs us. We need the land, we need the clean air and water, right? That is how we survive. So these are some references for what I used in my presentation. And before I wrap up, I do want to conclude with some final thoughts. So just in, conclusion, it's really essential that we prioritize protecting the environment and human rights. We cannot get so indulged in the escapism, illusions, and delusions that the metaverse will provide that we ignore very real and critical challenges facing our world. The metaverse reflects the real world, and it's already presenting issues of discrimination, racism, classism, and biases. If we want the metaverse to be inclusive, safe, and beneficial for everyone, we should do our part to contribute to its development. It's also essential that we make a greater effort to inform ourselves about the various harms caused by technology, commit to a sustainable way to consume and an ethical way to produce technology. As we venture into the next wave of the innovation age, it is our collective civic duty to ensure that human rights and the environment is protected in the process. So thank you for taking time to tune into my session. I really hope you found it valuable. Feel free to stay connected with me on LinkedIn, Stacey Ann Berry, or you can visit my websites, staceyannberry.com and bestellargroup.com. And may your gather be well.